You're holding a rock. Black. Smooth. Sharper than anything you've ever touched. You didn't make it. You found it, wedged into gray stone near a volcano. And when you cracked it open against another rock, it split into an edge so thin it could cut you before you even felt it. That's obsidian, volcanic glass. And around 700,000 years ago, at a site called Kariandusi in Kenya, an early human ancestor, Homo erectus, picked up a piece of it and used it as a tool. That is the first known moment a human ever held glass. Not a window, not a cup, not a lens, just a rock that formed when lava cooled too fast to turn into crystal. Here's the strange part. Glass existed on Earth for billions of years before a single human figured out how to make it. Lightning strikes sand and leaves behind hollow glass tubes. Meteorites melt entire stretches of desert into sheets of crystal. Volcanoes pour out rivers of molten rock that cool into obsidian fields. Nature had been making glass since before life even existed, and for hundreds of thousands of years, humans used it without knowing what it actually was, or that they could make it themselves. Then, someone did. That single moment changed the world more than almost anything else we've ever invented, and it probably started with nobody noticing an accident happening right in front of them. So how do you get from a volcanic rock to the screen you're staring at right now? 5,000 years, a dozen civilizations, at least 3 accidents, and a physics problem scientists are still arguing about today. Let's start with what glass actually is, because almost everyone gets this wrong. You've probably heard that glass is secretly a liquid, that it flows so slowly you can't see it move, that old cathedral windows are thicker at the bottom because the glass has been oozing downward for centuries. That's a myth. In 1998, physicist Edgar Zanotto ran the numbers and found it would take longer than the age of the universe, over 13.8 billion years, for glass to visibly flow at room temperature. Those uneven cathedral windows? That's just how medieval glassmakers made them. They spun molten glass into flat discs, and the discs came out naturally thicker on one edge. Installers just put the heavy side down. The glass never moved a millimeter. What glass actually is something much stranger. It's what scientists call an amorphous solid. Its atoms never lined up into a neat, repeating grid the way ice or salt or metal does. Cool most liquids slowly, and the atoms organize themselves into crystals. But cool certain liquids fast enough, and the atoms freeze in place before they get the chance. That's glass. A material stuck halfway between liquid and solid, frozen mid-transition forever. Physicists still argue about how to even classify it, and that strangeness is exactly what makes it useful. It can be clear, colored, shaped into something thinner than a hair or thick enough to stop a bullet, and it all starts with sand. Most glass is silicon dioxide, the same stuff that makes up common beach sand. On its own, sand melts at over 1700 degrees Celsius, too hot for any ancient furnace to reach. But add the right mineral, and that melting point drops dramatically. Ancient glassmakers used natron, a mineral scraped from dried lake beds in Egypt. Mix it with sand, heat it to around 1000 degrees, and the sand melts. One problem, glass made from just sand and natron dissolves in rainwater. So you add one more ingredient, lime, from crushed limestone or seashells, to lock it in place. Roughly 70% sand, 15% soda, 10% lime. That recipe is over 5,000 years old. It's basically the same recipe we still use today. So who figured this out first? For 2,000 years, people repeated a story from the Roman writer Pliny the Elder. Venetian sailors camping on a beach propped their cooking pots on blocks of natron. The campfire heat fused the natron with the sand beneath it, and molten glass came pouring out. It's a great story. It's also almost certainly false. A beach campfire barely reaches 800 degrees, nowhere near hot enough to make glass, even with natron helping. Pliny wasn't reporting science. He was repeating a legend. The real story is messier and much older. The earliest glass objects we found are tiny beads from Mesopotamia and Egypt, dating back roughly 4,500 years. The leading theories is that glass was a byproduct, an accident that happened while ancient craftsmen were making faience, a glazed quartz material that was everywhere in the ancient world. Sometimes the glaze on the surface would fully melt into real glass. Someone noticed. Someone scraped it off, and a new material was born. Another theory points to metalworking, that the glassy slag left behind from smelting copper gave someone the same idea. Either way, nobody set out to invent glass. They were making something else, and glass fell out sideways. Which, if you think about it, is how a surprising number of history's biggest inventions actually happened. And here's something most people don't know. Egypt and Mesopotamia appear to have invented glass completely independently of each other. In 2012, archaeologist Andrew Shortland ran chemical analysis on early glass samples from both regions. The trace elements were different raw materials, different signatures. Two civilizations working with the same basic chemistry, landing on the same invention without ever comparing notes. But here's the part that connects everything. For its first 1,000 years, glass wasn't an everyday material. It was a serious luxury. Around 1350 BC, letters between Egyptian pharaohs and other Near Eastern rulers survive. And in one of them, a king literally complains that the glass he received as a diplomatic gift was low quality. They were treating glass the way modern leaders treat diamonds. The most important glass workshop from this era was found at Amarna, the short-lived Egyptian capital built around 1350 BC. Archaeologists found glass rods, ingots in multiple colors, half-finished vessels, and the remains of furnaces. Later excavations revealed a two-step process. First, raw material was partly melted into a rough mixture. Then, that mixture was crushed and remelted at a higher temperature to produce clear, bubble-free glass. That's not a campfire accident. That's industrial chemistry, over 3,000 years ago. And there's one piece of ancient glass that connects this whole story to something far older than any human civilization. In 1922, when Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun, he found a carved scarab beetle set into the king's ceremonial breastplate. For decades, everyone assumed it was a common gemstone. In 1998, a mineralogist finally tested it properly and discovered it wasn't a gemstone at all. It was natural glass, formed in the Libyan desert nearly 29 million years ago. Almost certainly the result of a meteorite impact so violent it melted the desert sand on contact. Egyptian craftsmen found a piece of glass forged by a cosmic impact that happened millions of years before a single human walked the earth. They thought it was beautiful, so they carved it into a sacred beetle and placed it on the chest of a dead king. They had no idea what it actually was. They just knew it was stunning. Now, the earliest glass vessels weren't blown. They were built. Around 1500 BC, craftsmen shaped a core out of clay and dung around a metal rod, dipped it into molten glass, smoothed the surface by hand, and scraped the core out once it cooled. The result was a small, colorful bottle, usually used to hold perfume or oil. Each one took hours. Each one was expensive. And for over 1,500 years, that was the only way to make a hollow piece of glass on the entire planet. Then, around 50 BC, on the coast of what's now Lebanon or Syria, someone had an idea that changed everything. They stuck a blob of molten glass onto the end of a hollow iron pipe, and they blew. Glass blowing might be one of the most underrated inventions in human history. Before it, one glass vessel took hours of skilled labor. After it, a trained craftsman could make one in minutes, dozens in a single day. Glass got thinner, lighter, bigger, genuinely transparent for the first time. And because it was suddenly so fast to produce, it stopped being a luxury only the elite could afford. Ordinary people could finally own it. One of the earliest glassmakers we know by name is a man called Ennion, working in the 1st century AD. He signed his pieces in Greek. Ennion made this. His work has been found scattered across the entire Mediterranean. He wasn't just a craftsman, he was one of the first branded manufacturers in history, stamping his name onto a glass cup 2,000 years ago. The Romans didn't invent glass blowing, but they did what Rome always did. They industrialized it. Workshops stretched from Cologne to Alexandria, mass-producing bottles, cups, and storage jars. A Roman writer noted that a glass drinking cup could be bought for a single copper coin. Glass had gone from rivaling gemstones to costing less than a meal. And the Romans used glass for something nobody had tried before: windows. Fragments of Roman window glass have been found at Pompeii, preserved under the ash from 79 AD, thick, a little cloudy, but they let light in while keeping the weather out. The idea that you could see through a wall feels obvious to us now. Someone had to invent that. But the Romans also made glass so advanced that modern scientists are still impressed by it. The Lycurgus cup, sitting in the British Museum today, is a 4th century Roman drinking cup that does something almost no other ancient object can do. It changes color. Light it from the front and it looks solid jade green. Light it from behind and it glows translucent ruby red. Nobody could explain how for over 1,000 years. Then, in 1990, researchers examined it under a powerful microscope and found the answer. The glass is packed with particles of gold and silver so small, tens of nanometers wide, that they're invisible to the naked eye. Those particles bend light in a way that creates the color shift. The Romans built nanotechnology 1,600 years before anyone had a word for it. After Rome fell, the center of glassmaking shifted east. Islamic glassmakers across Syria and Egypt spent centuries mastering techniques, enameling, gilding, metallic staining, that Europe wouldn't catch up to for hundreds of years. The mosque lamps produced in Damascus and Aleppo remain some of the most celebrated glass objects ever made. Then, in 1400, the city of Damascus was sacked, and its glassworkers were taken away. One of the finest glass industries on earth was gone almost overnight. Meanwhile, in Venice, glass was becoming a state secret. In 1291, the Venetian government ordered every glass furnace in the city moved to the island of Murano, just off the coast. Officially, it was about fire safety. Really, it was about control. Keeping the glassmakers isolated made their techniques far easier to protect. Murano's glassmakers were given real privileges. They could carry swords. Their daughters could marry into nobility, but they were forbidden from leaving the Republic. If one fled, the state would try to bring them home. If that failed, their families could suffer for it. Around 1450, a Murano craftsman named Angelo Barovieri created something Europe had never seen: a glass so clear it was almost invisible, nearly free of color. He called it cristallo. It looked like natural rock crystal, and it made Venice the undisputed capital of glass for the next 200 years. Naturally, France wanted the secret. In 1665, the French finance minister lured several Murano glassworkers to Paris. A few of them later died under suspicious circumstances, fueling rumors that Venice had poisoned them to protect its monopoly. But the secret was already out. France built its own glassworks, which eventually became one of the largest glass companies in the world, still running today. And between 1678 and 1684, that French glass went into 357 mirrors installed in a single room at the Palace of Versailles, a political message made entirely out of glass. France didn't need Venice anymore. Speaking of mirrors, before glass ones existed, people saw their reflection in polished metal, dim, distorted. Venetian glassmakers built the first real glass mirrors in the early 1500s, using a mixture of tin and toxic mercury. In 1835, a German chemist replaced the mercury with a thin layer of silver, using a safer chemical process. That's essentially the same method used in almost every mirror made today. Every time you check your reflection, you're looking through technology that traces back to a lab in Germany nearly 200 years ago. While Venice was busy guarding its secrets, glass was quietly doing something far bigger on the other side of Europe. It was inventing science. Eyeglasses were invented in northern Italy around 1286. Historians estimate they added 15 to 20 extra years of productive reading to scholars' lives, because before glass lenses existed, anyone who lost their near vision, usually by their 40s or 50s, simply lost the ability to read. Glass gave them their eyes back. And when the printing press exploded across Europe a century and a half later, the demand for reading glasses exploded right along with it. More books meant more people needed glasses. More people with glasses meant more demand for books. Without glass, mass literacy might have taken centuries longer to arrive. In 1608, a Dutch spectacle maker filed the first patent for a telescope. A year later, Galileo built his own improved version, pointed it at Jupiter, and saw 4 moons orbiting the planet. 4 points of light, seen through 2 curved pieces of glass, prove that not everything in the universe revolves around Earth. And at the other end of the scale, a Dutch cloth merchant named Antony van Leeuwenhoek, with no scientific training at all, ground tiny glass lenses by hand that could magnify objects over 200 times. Using them, he became the first human being to ever see bacteria, and a year later, the first to see human sperm cells. He called them little animals, and wrote letters describing them to scientists in London who had never imagined such things existed. Modern microbiology starts with a self-taught tradesman grinding glass in a workshop. 2 curved pieces of glass, one pointed at the sky, one pointed at a drop of water. Together, they proved the universe was bigger and smaller than anyone had ever imagined. That's what glass did to human knowledge. It cracked it wide open. In 1903, a French chemist accidentally knocked a glass flask off a shelf. It hit the ground and cracked, but it didn't shatter. The pieces stayed together, held in place by a thin plastic film that had dried on the inside of the glass. He patented the discovery as laminated safety glass. Its first major use was gas mask lenses in World War I. Today, it's in every car windshield on the planet. In 1952, an engineer at a British glass company had an idea that would reshape the entire industry. Pour molten glass onto a bath of liquid tin. Because glass floats on tin, it spreads out naturally into a perfectly flat sheet, cooling as it moves. The process took 7 years and a fortune to perfect. It was announced in 1959. Today, over 90% of the world's flat glass, every window you've looked through today, is made this exact way. Then, glass got smaller, much smaller. In 1966, an engineer proposed something that sounded impossible, that thin strands of ultra-pure glass could carry information using pulses of light. The problem was purity. The glass available at the time lost too much light to travel any real distance. By 1970, researchers had solved it, producing the first glass fiber pure enough to carry light for kilometers without losing the signal. Today, over 500 million kilometers of glass fiber crisscross the planet. More than 95% of the world's internet traffic moves through threads of glass thinner than a human hair, running along the ocean floor at the speed of light. The internet you're using right now is made of glass. In 1960, an American glass company developed an experimental ultra-strong glass using a chemical process that replaced small ions on the glass surface with larger ones, compressing it into something remarkably scratch-resistant. Nobody wanted it. The project sat forgotten in a filing cabinet for 45 years. Then, in 2006, Apple came looking for a strong, scratch-resistant glass for a new touchscreen device. The old dormant formula got pulled out, reworked, and rebranded. It shipped inside the very first iPhone in 2007. Within 2 decades, that same glass formula was inside billions of devices worldwide. So, how did humans actually invent glass? They didn't plan it. Nobody sat down and decided to melt sand into a transparent solid. Someone was paying close attention while making something else entirely, and noticed a strange, shiny material forming where it shouldn't have been. For its first 1,000 years, that discovery stayed a luxury, locked away in royal workshops. Then, glass blowing shattered that exclusivity and turned it into the first mass-produced transparent material on Earth. From there, it became windows, mirrors, lenses, telescopes, microscopes, fiber optic cables, the screen you're looking at right now. And it probably wasn't invented just once. The evidence suggests it was discovered independently in at least 2 separate places because the same materials and the same furnaces existed in both regions at the same time. The accident was always going to happen somewhere. It was just a matter of where it happened first. But here's the part that stays with me. Glass is sand. That's all it has ever been. Heated, shaped, cooled into something you can see through. And from that one material, humans built lenses that revealed the shape of the universe, fibers that carry the entire sum of human knowledge under the ocean at the speed of light, mirrors that show you your own face, a beetle carved from a cosmic impact placed on the chest of a dead king. You're surrounded by glass right now. You're probably looking through some of it, and the only reason any of it exists is because someone, thousands of years ago, noticed something strange happening inside a furnace. A thin, shining layer forming where nothing should have formed. And instead of scraping it away and forgetting about it, they looked closer.